Today in Edge of Eternities, we get a card that will kill your opponent for just 4 mana, assuming you can gain enough life. The weirdest Phyrexian Arena ever, a green ramp creature that seems absurdly busted, and so much more. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Edge of Eternities spoilers. So we're nearing the end of spoiler season. We get the full set on Friday, but today we still have some really cool cards. Honestly, some of the cards from the entire set that I'm most hyped to build around because they just do some ridiculously cool things, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking spicy new Edge of Eternities cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk some Edge of Eternities. So first up today, we get a new Azorius rare that just might be one of my favorite cards from the entire set in Space-Time Anomaly. So Space-Time Anomaly, 4 mana Azorius sorcery, says target player mills cards equal to your life total. So Space-Time Anomaly, pretty interesting because it's only the second card in Magic that I can think of at least that actually cares about life gain and mill. The first was Hope Estium from the Final Fantasy set, and Hope ended up being kind of a sleeper hit commander from the set. Turns out people really like the weird combo of life gaining and milling, and if you're playing a Hope Estium deck, Space-Time Anomaly is perfect for the deck. It's one of the only other cards in all of Magic that actually cares about both gaining life and milling. I will say in Hope Estium Commander, I think you play this every single time, but it is a little annoying that it only moves target player. So in a Hope deck, you can probably use this to maybe take one player out of the game, but you're not going to be able to kill the entire table unless you get into like spell copying effects or something. So discounting Hope Estium Commander decks, how good is Space-Time Anomaly? So to understand this, we have to think about the going rate for mill. So if you think about standard, the best mill spell is Jace the Perfected Mind. Going to be rotating actually. Jace the Perfected Mind is mill 15 for 4 mana. If you go back to modern, Glimpse the Unthinkable is kind of like the baseline rate, mill 10 for 2 mana. So Space-Time Anomaly, the trick here is it really depends on your life total, right? If you are at 20 life when you cast this, it actually mills more than Jace the Perfected Mind. On the other hand, if your opponent beats you down and you're at 2 life, this is a stone unplayable card that isn't going to do anything, right? It's 4 mana mill 2, you don't even want to cast it. So I'm not sure how good this is in traditional mill decks. I will say, I think in like modern mill, it's just too expensive, it's not going to make it. But in standard mill, I could almost see this being a replacement for Jace the Mind Sculptor. First, I should say though, I'm pretty sure this card is just a ridiculously unbeatable bomb in Limited. In Limited, people only start with 40 cards in their deck. You draw 7 card opening hands, you're already down to 33 cards, and then you draw each turn, you might have other effects that draw you cards. It seems pretty easy to just cast this on turn 4 in Limited and potentially win the game. Like, this is likely going to be 4 mana, mill 20, your opponent's probably going to have like 7 cards left in their deck or something at that point. So I actually think this is just a super easy snap it off first big bomb in Limited. I don't know, I don't play that much draft, but the card seems busted in draft to me. In standard, I think there's a couple of possibilities for this card. So one is, this could be a Jace replacement in a controlling mill deck. So the downside is the inconsistency, right? Jace is just always 4 mana mill 15. Space-Time Anomaly can be 4 mana mill your opponent's entire deck. It can also be 4 mana mill a single card if you're at 1 life. But I could see some sort of like Azorius control mill deck showing up. You got Space-Time Anomaly, you got G-Door on the mana base, you got River Churn Monument to kind of double up the mill from Space-Time Anomaly. You got stuff like Water Crystal if you want to go really deep, and then you could back this up with life-gaining control cards. Like, if you're playing a control deck, you probably want Visa anyway, which is going to gain you life. Maybe you play Fumigate as your Wrath to gain even more life. Maybe you have like Lyra or Ezreal, these big life-linking flyers to gain even more life. So you can use those to buff for your life total, and then Space-Time Anomaly is just kind of your finisher. And in a deck like this, some control deck, it's almost even better than Jace because it's pretty easy to loop from the graveyard with some sort of Snapcaster effect. Effects can return spells from your graveyard to your hand. So unlike a Planeswalker, which you actually kind of have to reanimate, I think it's pretty easy to cast this multiple times if you want to. You could also go super deep in like 1,000-Year Storm and just mill everything, but I think this actually could be a competitive finisher in like a mill control deck. The other thing I love about this card is it's not really just a mill card. Like, I know it is a mill card, but if you really think about it, this is like an upgraded Felidar Sovereign in a lot of ways, or an upgraded Test of Endurance. These cards that win you the game if you're at 40 or 50 life. With Space-Time Anomaly, in a 60 card format, if you can get to 40 or 50 life and resolve this, you just win the game, and you don't even gotta wait till your next upkeep. Like, I guess you gotta wait until your opponent draws for their turn, or you gotta force them to draw a card, but it's essentially a Felidar Sovereign that isn't a creature that sits out on the battlefield, and it wins the game quicker than Felidar Sovereign. So that's the other appealing part about this card. It's not playing in some sort of like fair mill control deck, but maybe playing this in like against the odd style combo deck. Maybe play this in some sort of Soul Sisters deck, where the whole plan is just gain as much life as possible with Hinterland Sanctifier, Case of Uneaten Feast, win Crystal for even more life, and then you get up to like 40 life, you cast this, and you just mill your opponent's deck. In a 60 card format, people start with 60 cards. They draw 7, so they're at 53. As the game goes along, they're drawing extra cards. It seems pretty realistic to me that somewhere between 40 and 50 life should just let you mill your opponent's entire deck with this card. So I think that's a possibility. There's not a great option to just like gain a huge amount of life with one card in Standard. The best I think is actually Elixir, maybe, where if you can do a bunch of self-milling, you can pay 5 and exile it, shuffle all the non-land cards in your graveyard back in your library, gain a life for each one that was shuffled in this way. So that could be enough that you just boost your life total up high enough that a single Space-Time Anomaly could win the game. It could also be like some sort of Ancient Cornucopia card. Maybe you're playing Ancient Cornucopia like 5-color pile, and yeah, you're not gaining, 40 life all at once, but you're gaining 2 life, 3 life, 4 life a turn as you're casting your spells, and then Space-Time Anomaly comes down and closes out the game. So I think those are the kind of synergies you're looking for with the card. Once you get back to older formats, it becomes very easy to gain huge amounts of life. You got stuff like Beacon of Immortality, Revival Revenge, they can just double your life total, which should be enough to like 2-card combo kill with Space-Time Anomaly. So I think this card can actually be an interesting, like, probably not super competitive, but against the odd style combo finisher. We also have in Modern Martyr of Sands, which might be the easiest way to do this. Martyr of Sands, for 1 mana, can sack itself, and you gain 3 times X life, where X is the number of white cards you reveal in your hand. So if you have a Martyr of Sands, and you have a full hand, you can sack this to gain 21 life, and then you have something like Abiding Grace that can reanimate it, so you can sack it again and gain 21 more life. That should give you more than enough life to win with Space-Time Anomaly with just a single copy. So there's actually a lot of possibilities with this card. Once you get back to Commander, like I said, seems like a Hope Estium staple. Like, if you're playing Hope, you're just playing this. Also kind of cute with Will, Scion of Peace, another Azorius commander that just wants you to gain a huge amount of life to get a massive discount on the spells that you cast. So it seems really good there. It could also be some sort of combo piece to mill yourself, because remember, this just says target player mills cards equal to your life total. It doesn't say target opponent. So if you want to, you could use this to fill your own graveyard, maybe mill your entire deck to win with Thassa's Oracle or Laboratory Maniac, or mill yourself to reanimate a ton of stuff with Ascend to Avertus. So Space-Time Anomaly, I actually love this card. This is one of the coolest cards in the set. I think it could actually lead to a competitive like mill control deck in Standard as the Jace Perfected Mind replacement. And it also just has a ton of weird against the odds combo potential. We also got a card that is kind of just jaw-droppingly absurd in Icetill Explorer. So Icetill Explorer, a 4-mana green Insect Scout. It's a 2/4. It says you can play an additional land on each turn. You can play lands from your graveyard, and landfall, when a land enters under your control, you mill a card. So Icetill Explorer is absolutely insane. We have cards in Standard right now that let you play an extra land drop. We've had in the recent past Wayward Swordtooth. We got Hugs in Standard right now. But Icetill Explorer is so much better than these cards. This is essentially an Oracle of Moldiah mixed with a Ramanop Excavator, and when you mash these two things together, you get an absolutely absurd card. We have cards that let you play lands from your graveyard. We have cards that let you play extra lands. We haven't had one card that does all of that at once, and Icetill Explorer does both of those things. So this just lets you do absurd things. You even as a bonus get to mill yourself as you make your land drops, which I think it fairly gets you more lands in the graveyard that then you can use to recast with Icetill Explorer, but can also stock your graveyard for Insidious Roots or Zombify, so you get some extra upside there in like a graveyard deck. But if you think about what this card can do, Picture this in the new landfall deck that we have in Standard with Tifa, in Mossborn Hydra, in Terra Eveline Chocobo. You play your landfall payoffs, you play your Icetill Explorer. That lets you play like a Fabled Passage from your graveyard. So that's landfall number 1. You crack the Fabled Passage, get another land, that's landfall number 2. Then you can just immediately play the Fabled Passage from your graveyard again, landfall number 3. Crack it again, that's landfall number 4. That is a lot of triggers with a Mossborn Hydra or a Tifa. Your Mossborn Hydra or Tifa, if they're starting at their base, just 1 power, and you double it 4 times, you're going from 1 to 2, from 2 to 4, from 4 to 8, from 8 to 16. So a single fetch land with the Icetill Explorer gets you 16 power Tifas and Mossborn Hydra. If you throw a Traveling Chocobo into the mix to double your landfall triggers, which is already a 4 of in these landfall decks, then you're going to get 8 landfall triggers, and your opponent just dies on the spot. Like, you get so much damage, you just win the game. So I think Icetill Explorer, absolutely insane in like the landfall style decks. It also reminds me, there used to be this modern deck that I love that played Ramanop Excavator and Azusa, and then you try to like strip mine lock your opponent with Ghost Quarter. It was called Value Town, and this card makes me wish that Value Town was still a thing you could do in Modern, because it is so perfect for that deck. It is literally exactly what you want, which is land drops from your graveyard and extra land drops. So I think this could maybe even have some fringe Modern potential. Also worth noting, we're getting strip mine on Magic Arena for the first time, and one of the things I'm most excited to do is teach some Arena Zoomers about the power of strip mining, and Icetill Explorer, perfect with strip mine. You can strip mine, blow up a land, play your Icetill Explorer, replay the strip mine, blow up another land drop, replay the strip mine, blow up another land. That is a lot of Stone Rains hitting your opponent all in one turn thanks to Icetill Explorer, and you're even filling your graveyard along the way. As far as Commander is concerned, I think there's a bunch of different archetypes that want this card. So obviously, any sort of landfall deck, Necrobloom, Omnath, Asai, Tifa Lockhart, this is going to be one of the best cards in your entire deck. It is so incredibly strong as a way to get more landfall triggers, especially with fetch lands. It's also great in decks that just want to get lands in and out of the graveyard. We have that as the theme of the new Jund Commander decks for Edge of Eternities with Hearthhall and Sezreal. So Icetill Explorer seems like a really easy upgrade there, but also Gitrog Monster and Lord Windgrace. In those decks, not only are you getting extra land drops and getting lands out of your graveyard, which is something you want with Icetill Explorer in those decks anyway, but it's also a way you can fill your graveyard, which synergizes with your commander. Speaking of filling your graveyard, I think this card is actually just really good in generic graveyard decks. If you're playing like Disa the Restless, or Madrotha, or Marin, or the Myco Tyrant, the fact that you're getting extra land drops so it's wrapping you, and you're able to mill yourself to fill your graveyard to support your commander, makes it really, really strong here as well. So I think the Icetill Explorer is just a absolutely ridiculous card. It is so incredibly strong. In some ways, I can see the comparison to something like Prophet of Kruphix, where Prophet of Kruphix just stuck together 2 different effects that are strong but fine on their own, but when you put them together, flash plus untapping all your stuff, you get a really busted card. I feel like that is the same thing that Icetill Explorer does. You're putting together 2 effects that on their own are fine, playing an extra land, playing lands from your graveyard, but when you put both of those together on the same card, you kind of get this supercharged pile of synergy. So I think this card is actually one of the strongest cards that we've seen from the set, definitely for Commander, and I think it actually has some reasonably high potential in landfall decks in Standard too. We also got a new green rare spacecraft in Sledge-Class Seedship. So it's a 3-mana spacecraft. It has station. You gotta get up to 7 counters on it. If you do, you get a flyer that's a 4/5, and whenever it attacks, you get to put a creature from your hand onto the battlefield. So Sledge-Class Seedship, this kind of compares to Kona Rescue Beastie, Summoner's Grimoire. We also have Vaya in Standard. We actually have a lot of these green things that can cheat something into play from your hand if you pay a mana and lose Summoning Sickness, or attack, or get it tapped on your second main phase. So Sledge-Class Seedship isn't especially unique, and actually, in some ways, it might be the worst of these cards, because you have to tap 7 power creatures to actually turn it on. Like Summoner's Grimoire, you just cast for 4 mana, and then attack with it and put something into play. Even Kona, if you can just tap it down, you can immediately, the turn you play it, get something into play. Sledge-Class Seedship, gonna take some work to actually turn on. And honestly, we haven't seen any of these cards actually be all that good. One thing I did want to mention about this card, because there's been some confusion over this. So if you turn Sledge-Class Seedship into a creature in some other way, like Synthesizer Lab Chip or a Tough Cookie, you don't get its ability. The ability of a spacecraft is tied to the number of charge counters on it, not to it being a creature, which is different than vehicles. Vehicles, their abilities are tied to it just being a creature. So if you turn a vehicle into a creature with Tough Cookie, you're going to get its ability. Sledge-Class Seedship in the other spacecraft, there's no cheating on the counters. You got to get the counters on there if you want the ability. So turning into a creature doesn't actually do anything. So don't build your deck to do that because it just doesn't actually work. So how can we make this card work? And I think if this card works, it is because you can do some very explosive things with it if you build around it. So picture this. Turn 1, you play Llanowar Elves. Turn 2, you play Sledge-Class Seedship. Turn 3, you play Pugnacious Hammer Skull. You tap the Hammer Skull, you tap the Llanowar. That's 7 charge counters on the Sledge-Class Seedship. It becomes a creature. It has pseudo haste because it's already been on the battlefield for a turn. You swing in with a 4/5 flyer and put a, I don't know, summon Bahamut, a Gishath, whatever big finisher you want to play. That's very explosive. That is super duper fast. How consistently will that happen? You gotta have the Elves in specific on turn 1, you gotta have Hammer Skull in specific on turn 3, and the Seedship. So it's kind of a 3-card combo, so this Dream Draw isn't gonna happen most of the time, but when it does happen, it's probably just gonna win you the game. It is a very, very fast kill if you can pull it off. So I think that's the kind of stuff you're looking for with this card, is combinations that can let you do it super quickly. The easiest way to take advantage of it, though, is probably play it with Kona. If this card is going to work in Standard, outside of some of the nut draw stuff we were talking about, I think that Kona is the home for it. So Kona needs to be tapped at your second main phase to put a card into play from your hand. It can put a permanent into play, so in some ways even better than Sledge-Class Seedship. So the trick here is Seedship lets you tap Kona to put station counters on it, so it turns on Kona, and then Kona helps turn on Seedship. So if you play them both together, you actually get a lot of redundancy and consistency. So maybe we see some sort of mono green cheat things into play deck develop around these two cards, because they do synergize together really, really well. As far as Commander is concerned, I don't typically play cards like this, like cheating a big creature into play from your hand and going through a bunch of hoops. In Commander, a lot of the times, I would rather just cast another ramp spell and then just hard cast my big things as I want to later in the game. But there are a few places that I'd consider this card. So it's really good in Kona decks, obviously, just like Standard. I would also probably play it in Spacecraft decks, just because how many good Spacecraft do you have? Not that many, because they're all coming from one set. Also seems really good with Rip Spawn Hunter, just because Rip is another survival card that wants to be tapped on your second main phase, so this helps get the job done. So I think that there are homes for this card, but honestly, I think this is probably more of an against the odds card. I'm excited to build around it with Kona. I think that it can actually be very powerful there, just because one thing we've seen time and time again is when you have these combo style decks, if you only have one copy of your key combo piece, you're going to deal with consistency issues. But once a combo deck gets a second copy of its key combo piece, that can sometimes take a pretty janky combo deck and make it into a very powerful deck. So I'm excited to have this be more redundancy for a Kona deck. Otherwise, I'm not sure it's like meaningfully better than Summoner's Grimoire and some of the other versions of this effect that we already have in Standard. We also got a super weird one in Requiem Monolith. So Requiem Monolith, a 3-mana artifact that says tap until end of turn target creature gains. Whenever this creature is dealt damage, you draw that many cards and lose that much life, and that creature's controller may have this artifact deal 1 damage to it, activate only as a sorcery. So we have a lot to unpack with this card. So first, its ability. Whenever this creature is dealt damage, you draw that many cards and lose that much life. That sticks with the creature and its controller. So if you activate this on your creature, you're going to draw a card and lose a life. If you activate it on your opponent's creature, they're going to draw a card and lose a life. And that's just from Requiem Monolith's ability. Once other things start dealing damage to the creatures, it can get out of control really quickly. And I've seen some people complaining about this being activate only as a sorcery. I am here to tell you that if this was activatable at instant speed, it would be a completely messed up card that would break the game. Like, if you could just leave this on the battlefield, how would anyone ever block or attack? Because they'd always be worried that you'd activate this, and someone would draw a bunch of cards, lose a bunch of life. It just would make the game unplayable. So it almost has to be activate only as a sorcery. But what can you do with this card? So on level 1, this is a Phyrexian Arena that draws you a card and loses you a life each turn, assuming you have at least one creature with toughness 2 or greater on the battlefield. Because you can always just activate this, you ping your Icetill or whatever, you draw a card, you gain a life. Seems pretty powerful, right? I like Phyrexian Arena quite a bit in commander decks. We'll have to wait and see. The only downside is if there isn't a creature on the battlefield, then it gets a lot worse. Part of the power of Phyrexian Arena is you can just drop it on turn 3. You don't need any setup. You're just drawing an extra card every turn. Requiem Monolith, it's Phyrexian Arena that requires not a ton of setup, but some amount of setup, but it also has this ridiculously high upside. So there is some combo potential here. We've been talking about throughout spoiler season, Dawnsire's Sunstar Dreadnought, how its ability to deal 100 damage to something can make it a combo piece with Screaming Nemesis. You have your Screaming Nemesis, you have your Dawnsire leveled up to at least 10 charge counters, you attack, you hit your Screaming Nemesis for 100, throw that 100 damage at your opponent's face. We can basically do the same thing in reverse with Requiem Monolith. If you have a Dawnsire charged up, you just activate your Requiem Monolith, targeting one of your opponent's creatures. You attack with any creature. Dawnsire deals 100 damage to whatever creature of your opponent's you targeted. That creature takes 100 damage, which means your opponent is going to take 100 damage and draw 100 cards and lose a game in multiple ways. They're going to lose to damage and to milling out all at once. So that seems kind of hilarious. You could even do this to yourself in older formats if you have like a Lab Man or a Thassa's Oracle. Yeah, you might die to the damage, which is a bit of a concern. You need to gain a bunch of life along the way, but still, it is kind of a funny way to take advantage of this card. The card is also just absurd with things that deal damage to creatures. Like, if you activate this on one of your creatures, and then Lightning Bolt that creature, you kind of turn Lightning Bolt into an Ancestral Recall, or in Standard we have Scorching Shot. 2 mana deal 5 damage to a creature. You Requiem Monolith, then you Scorching Shot your creature. In the end, you're going to draw 6 cards altogether. 5 from the Scorching Shot, 1 from the Requiem Monolith itself. That is a ridiculous amount of card advantage for the mana you're putting into it. The only thing is you do lose a lot of life along the way. So keep that in mind. The life loss is an issue. In some situations, you might not even be able to do it because you might die, but you can draw a ridiculous amount of cards once you build around this card. It's also very good with fight spells. That's another way you can have your creatures take damage. You Requiem Monolith one of your creatures, then you Primal Might or Bushwhack or whatever to make your creature fight one of your opponent's creatures, and you get to draw a ton of cards along the way. So this is way more than a Phyrexian Arena. Like, Phyrexian Arena is just the base level. Once you get into the synergies of this card can do some wild things. So in Commander, I think you can play this in almost any black deck like a Phyrexian Arena. As I mentioned before, the biggest problem is you need some amount of setup. If you're a super creature-light deck, you might not want Requiem Monolith because maybe you don't have enough creatures to consistently be activating it on your own creatures. But if you have a reasonable number of creatures, this does a pretty good Phyrexian Arena impression with a bunch of upside built in. It gets even better if you're in a deck that cares about damaging your own stuff. Maybe you're playing Indoraptor, the Enraged commander that you actively want to be damaging, so it throws its damage at your opponents and makes them sack stuff. Maybe you're a Stuffy Doll deck or a Bresh Taunter deck where you want to be dealing damage to your Stuffy Dolls. Now you can hit your Stuffy Doll, get some extra damage, and draw some extra cards along the way. It also gets pretty ridiculous with mass damage sweepers, like Blasphemous Act, for example. You can Requiem Monolith one of your creatures, Blasphemous Act, end up drawing 13 cards, losing 13 life, or you can have Blasphemous Act, and if one of your opponents is low on life, you can Requiem Monolith their creature, make them take 13 damage, draw 13 cards, if it's going to kill them along the way. So Requiem Monolith, I absolutely love this card. It's really wonky. We've never seen anything exactly like this, but I feel like it actually has potential to be super powerful, definitely in Commander, and possibly even in 60-card formats as well. We also got one of the sweetest auras we've seen in a minute in Moonlit Meditation. So talk about cards that have shenanigans. This is one of those cards. Moonlit Meditation, 3 mana aura. You enchant an artifact or creature that you own, and it says the first time that you would create 1 or more tokens each turn, you may instead create that many tokens that are copies of the enchanted permanent. So Moonlit Meditation, it's basically an Essex Fractal Bloom, but as an aura, kind of like a Mystic Reflection, but it can stick around from turn to turn rather than being a one-shot. So what do we do with this card? So first off, the card cares about the amount of tokens that you can make at once. So it only triggers once each turn, and it triggers based on the number of tokens you make. So if you can make 1 token the first time you make tokens each turn, you're going to get 1 copy of the thing. If you can make 2 tokens or 10 tokens, you're going to get 10 copies of the thing. So it scales really, really well with mass token production. But base level for this card, stick it on like a Cloud Blazer or a Riptide Gearhulk, whatever, some ETB creature, play something like Dragon Fodder that makes a couple of 1/1s. Those 1/1s are going to be Cloud Blazers or Riptide Gearhulks instead. You'll draw a ton of cards, you'll tuck a ton of your opponent's stuff. So that's kind of the easiest way to use this card. Also notable, you can put it on artifacts as well, which is pretty scary if you can put it on lands that are artifacts. We even have one in Standard, in Scene of the Crime. There's more once you get back to older formats. But if you put this on a artifact land and then do some mass token production like Song of Tatanzan, this might actually be one of the best, if not the best ramp spell that you can play in a blue deck. Yeah, you gotta jump through some hoops to make it work, but imagine like making 10 1/1 rats that are actually gonna be 10 artifact lands. That is a ridiculous amount of ramp. In Standard, probably the most competitive use of this card is Simulacrum Synthesizer. So if you put it on a Simulacrum Synthesizer, although sadly it's not an artifact itself, but if you put it on a synthesizer and then you play an artifact with mana value 3 or greater to trigger Synthesizer, it's going to make a token, but that token is going to be another synthesizer, and when that synthesizer comes into play, it'll trigger the first synthesizer, so you still get your construct, and then the next time you play a 3 mana value plus artifact, you'll have 2 synthesizers, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. It makes so many constructs, plus you can hit it with United Battlefront, which is one of the key cards in the synthesizer decks. So yes, there is a cost to playing a non-artifact in an artifact deck like the synthesizer deck, but this might actually be strong enough to make up for it. It also goes wild with things that make a bunch of tokens when they enter the battlefield. So Threefold Thunderhulk, for example, in Standard, and this kind of works on both levels. So on one hand, you can put Moonlit Meditation on the Threefold Thunderhulk and then play something else that makes tokens and get a bunch of copies of the Thunderhulk, which will then also make a ton of Gnome tokens, which is kind of busted. You can also put Moonlit Meditation on something else and then play a Threefold Thunderhulk. When it enters, you're going to get 3 gnomes. Those gnomes will be whatever you put the Moonlit Meditation on. So cards like Threefold Thunderhulk, Mirror Battlesphere, Avenger Zendikar, Phalith work incredibly well with Moonlit Meditation. They just make so many tokens or so many copies of themselves. In older formats, also super cute with Master of Waves. Master of Waves, this was the mystical reflection trick. But if you can put Moonlit Meditation on a Master of Waves and then like play a Master of Waves, all the elementals it would make are instead going to be Master of Waves, which will then make a ridiculous amount of tokens. Your elementals will be super huge. So that seems kind of hilarious. It also goes pretty wild with Academy Manufacture. Academy Manufacture, if you make a clue, a food, or a treasure, instead you get 1 of each. Notice Moonlit Meditation does not say the first time you would make creature tokens. It's any tokens. So this will make 3 tokens all at once. All of them will be copies of whatever you have the Moonlit Meditation on. So the fact that this works with treasures and clues and food is actually kind of busted. It also is super cute with Panharmonicon effects. Imagine putting this on Roaming Throne and getting a bunch of copies of Roaming Throne, or putting it on Panharmonicon, getting a bunch of copies of Panharmonicon, then anything you play with a triggered ability is going to just go absolutely wild. It's also one of the best ways to win with cards that want you to have a lot of them on the battlefield, like Biovisionary. If you get 4 Biovisionaries in play on the end step, you just win the game. So you put this on a Biovisionary, make something that creates 3 tokens, they're all Biovisionaries, you win the game on the end step. Or like Luck Bobblehead, put it on Luck Bobblehead, make a bunch of tokens. Eventually you might get enough Luck Bobbleheads that you roll the right numbers to win the game on the spot. So there's so many shenanigans with this card. Also worth pointing out, it works the first time you create tokens each turn, including your opponent's turns. So if you can put this on something that makes a token each upkeep, like a Tendershoot Dryad or an Illustrious Wanderglyph, it gets out of control super fast. Like, you put it on the Wanderglyph, which is a 4 mana 2/2. This is other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2 as long as you have the City's Blessing, which you should. Beginning of each upkeep, you make a 1/1 gnome artifact creature token. Well, that 1/1 gnome will actually be another Illustrious Wanderglyph, which will pump your artifacts even more. And then you go to the next player's upkeep, you'll make another token, which will be an Illustrious Wanderglyph. And just one time around the table, you're going to end up with like 4 Illustrious Wanderglyphs. All your artifacts are going to be absolutely absolutely massive, so it works really well with that type of token production as well. It's also just good with things that make a ton of tokens, like Stormherd makes 1/1 Pegasus tokens equal to your life total, which is pretty powerful even at 10 mana, but they're just 1/1s, right? But imagine if those 40 Stormherd tokens were 40 Hullbreak Horrors, or 40 Avenger of Zendikars, or 40 Risen Reefs, which I guess you probably just mill out if it's Risen Reef. You'd have to have a plan for that, but you will make the craziest board state of all time if you can get a Moonlit Meditation on anything spicy and cast one of these mass token producers. So Moonlit Meditation, I don't know if this card's actually good from a competitive sense, but it is one of my favorite cards from the set. This is one of those cards that is just going to lead to these huge, ridiculous, crazy turns, these big, splashy combo turns, and those are some of my favorite cards of all of Magic. So whether this card is actually competitive or not, I don't really care. I'm sure I'm going to be playing it a ton because it can do some really sweet things. Moving into the realm of lower rarity cards, there's a couple worth shouting out today, starting with Invasive Maneuvers. So Invasive Maneuvers, 2-mana instant. It deals 3 damage to a creature, but 5 damage instead if you control a spacecraft. So if you think about our big red removal spells that kill high toughness creatures in Standard, the competition's basically Witchtalker, Frenzy, Scorching Shot. Invasive Maneuvers is actually better, I think, than either of those, assuming you have a spacecraft. If you're not playing a spacecraft deck, then this card I think is kind of unplayable. But if you are playing spacecraft, then this becomes, I think, just like a really strong red removal spell is like a Scorching Shot that you can cast at instant speed. So we'll have to wait and see if there's actual spacecraft seeing play in Standard. But if there are, I think this could be a chase removal spell of those decks. We also got, speaking of spacecraft, a pretty interesting one in Larval Seedship. So a 3-mana spaceship. It's a green one. It has station, of course. You got to get 7+ counters on it for it to become a 3/3 flyer. But its enters ability is pretty good. When it enters, you can sacrifice a land or a lander. If you do, search your library for 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So Larval Seedship, kind of exciting because Springbloom Druid, which is essentially the same thing just on a 1/1, is already seen play in the landfall decks in Standard, just as a way to put multiple lands into play for Tifa Lockhart or Mossborn Hydra. So this might actually just be a better option. I think if you don't have any landers, it's debatable. At least Springbloom Druid, even though it's only a 1/1, it's a chump blocker, which is nice. Larval Seedship, you gotta tap 7 power creatures to turn it on, which you can do in the landfall deck. But if you build a massive Tifa or you build a massive Mossborn Hydra, you kind of want to attack with it. Although I will say, there are times with Tifa where you get it up to like 8 power, but your opponent has good blocks and you can't quite kill with Tifa, and you don't actually want to throw it into combat and have it die, because the next turn you can make it even bigger. That might be a way that you can actually turn this on. So I think this has a chance in the landfall decks. If you can get a lander token on the battlefield, then this card becomes absolutely great. When this is sack a lander token instead of a land and double ramp for 3 mana, that is super powerful. So here are the cards that exist so far that can make a lander token and cost less than 3 mana. So if you're playing Biotech Specialist or Biomechan Engineer, Sammy's Curiosity, Seedship Impact, maybe Sunstar Expansionist, Terrapec Intimidator, those are a little bit less consistent because of how they're worded. But if you're playing these cards, this goes up even higher in value. So I'm actually kind of curious to see if maybe we have some sort of like teamer ramp deck that's playing some of these 2-mana lander cards intentionally to power up Larval Seedship to double ramp and get up to like 6 mana on turn 4 and play something super busted. So I think that's a possibility as well. Also worth considering, can we fit any of these cards into the landfall deck? And that's where it becomes a little bit sketchier. Like Seedship Impact seems like a fine sideboard card. I could see that being a good sideboard option. I'm not sure you want to go into blue or red for Biotech Specialist, Biochan Engineer. Sammy's Curiosity, I guess if you want to go really deep, is kind of fine. It's 1 mana to gain 2 life and essentially put a rampant growth token on the battlefield. And then the lander token, you can sack at instant speed to trigger landfall, so maybe that could be an option for the deck. So we'll have to wait and see, but I think Larval Seedship, definitely worth keeping in mind. If you have landers, it's great, and even without landers, it's not that bad. We also got some new black card draw in Hymn of the Faller. So Hymn of the Faller, 2-mana sorcery, Surveil 1, then you draw a card and lose a life. But Void, if a non-land permanent left the battlefield or you warp this turn, draw another card. So Sim of the Faller, it's really up to how frequently you can Void. If you get to Void this, it's just a better version of Night Whisper or Sign in Blood. I guess you can't do the Sign in Blood, burn you out of the game thing. But really, this is 2 mana Surveil 1, draw 2, lose 1 if you have Void, which is really, really good. You're getting a Surveil, you're losing less life, and cards like Night Whisper and Sign in Blood actually see a lot of play in various formats. So I think this card has really high potential. The question's going to be, can you Void it consistently enough? When this is 2 mana, Surveil 1, draw a single card, lose a life, then it's kind of unplayable. So what kind of decks can make this work? So one would be sacrifice decks, like Sephiroth decks. You should be really good at voiding because you're just sacking stuff all the time. But I actually think just like black aggro decks can probably play this, where you just pressure your opponent, you're attacking, stuff trades off during combat, and then post-combat, you Hymn to the Faller, draw a couple cards, set things up for the next turn. So I think this card actually very powerful. It also could show up in a dedicated like warp void deck. If you really go in on warping in the void plan, you also get Tragic Trajectory. It's a really strong, even at sorcery speed, removal spell. If you can warp consistently, stuff like Timeline Color gives you some consistent warp abilities. So maybe we see actually like a black warp aggro deck that can take advantage of all these cards. So Hymn of the Faller, like I said, it really depends on how easily you can void. If your deck is voiding consistently, then Hymn to the Faller is just better Sign in Blood, better Night's Whisper. If you can't void consistently, the card's not great, but I think it definitely has high potential in those decks that can void. So Wizards mentioned in the very first preview stream for Edge of Eternities that one of the things they were trying to do with the set was make mono green aggro into a thing, and it seems that Wizards might not have been lying about this, because we also got Edge Rover, which is kind of a ridiculous power creep card. It is a 1 mana 2/2 artifact creature robot scout. It's a green card. It has reach for some reason. And then when it dies, each player creates a lander token, one of the rampant growth tokens. So Edge Rover is very notable just because it kind of has absurd stats. It kind of looks like Veteran Explorer at home. Veteran Explorer, when it dies, each player just ramps 2 basic lands. Edge Rover, I think the lander mode is supposed to be a drawback to some extent, but really, compared to other 1 mana 2/2s, it is not much of a drawback. I don't even know if it actually is a drawback. Like, it kind of depends on the situation. In a green aggro deck, you might not really have time to use the lander, and maybe your opponent can, so it could be a drawback, but there's also going to be times when your opponent's not really playing any basic lands and you have plenty of them and the lander doesn't really do anything. So it really depends on the situation. But if you consider the history of 1 mana 2/2s in Magic, they all typically have really big downsides, like Fleeting Effigy, Misbreath Elder, having to bounce back to your hand, Forsaken Miner just straight up can't block. So the downside of Edge Rover, which again, is it even a downside to give each player a lander token? I'm not even sure how much of a downside that is not much at all, especially when you throw in the fact that it's an artifact and it has reach on top of its stats. So Edge Rover, if mono green aggro is a thing, I feel like this is probably part of it. We always see a curve of like Edge Rover into Frenzied Baloth into Surrak. That is a lot of power going on the battlefield super, super quickly. It could also be good in some sort of landfall deck. So in green aggro, the lander token, when it dies, isn't going to do much of anything. But in a landfall deck, you actively can make use of that. You can sack it at instant speed during combat to pump your Tifa, pump your Mossborn Hydra, pump your Zaz Chocobo. The only thing I wonder about is there enough room for this card in landfall? If you look at landfall right now, Llanowar Elves, Zaz Chocobo are like staple level 1 drops. Do you have room for another 1 drop that is kind of just a beater and doesn't actually have landfall itself? That's going to be the question. Is the lander token enough to make up for the fact that it doesn't otherwise synergize with the deck? The other place it's interesting is in the Delirium deck. So if you look at like the Gruul Delirium deck, one of the tricks the deck uses to turn on Delirium is playing creatures that have multiple types, like Patchwork Beastie is an artifact creature, Fear of Missing Out is an enchantment creature. Edge Rover kind of fits there as well. It fits the aggro theme of the deck, it's above the curve, plus it's an artifact creature, so it's 2 card types in the graveyard for Delirium. Also, reach is kind of nice on this card. I don't think that's like the selling point, but it is sweet that this can block like a Deep Cavern Bat or a Spyglass Siren. There are some of those cheap like 1/1 flyers in Standard right now. So Edge Rover, The card is very above the curve. We'll have to wait and see if it's enough to make green aggro good, but if green aggro is a thing, I imagine this card's part of it, because we don't get 1-mana 2/2s very often, and when we do get them, they typically have massive downsides. Edge Rover, I'm pretty sure it's the best 1-mana 2/2 that has ever been printed, and that is pretty impressive. We also got a new pump spell, the Return of Monstrous Rage, sort of, in full bore. So full bore, 1-mana instant. Target creature you control gets +3/+2 until end of turn. If the creature was cast for its warp cost, it also gains trample and haste. So full bore, kind of reminiscent of Monstrous Rage as a 1-mana pump spell that gives +3 power and also trample, but I think it's a lot safer because you only get trample and haste if it's going on a warp creature. So I think that this is a card that in a warp deck is actually kind of scary. It plays really well with cards that have a cheap warp cost. Imagine like Halia Guided by Light or Pinnacle Emissary. You can warp these for just 1 mana, and then you can full bore for 1 more mana to give them +3/+2. You're going to smash for 6 damage with trample and haste for a total of 2 mana, which is kind of insane. If you want to go really deep, you can use like Bygone Colossus, which you can warp for 3 mana, but it's a 9/9. And then for 1 more mana, full bore, smack your opponent for 12 with trample. That is a lot of damage coming across. So I think that's one of the possibilities of this card. Play it in some sort of weird aggro warp deck where giving your warp creatures aggro does get around the biggest downside of warp, which is when you warp something, it's going to be summoning 6. So unless it has haste, you can't really do anything with it the turn that you play it. You get its ETB or whatever, but you can't really do anything with it as far as attacking the turn that you play it. But full bore gets around that problem. The other place that I think this could actually be good is just ignoring the warp cost altogether and playing it with Leyline of Resonance. If you look at the 1-mana pump spells that are going to be legal in standard after rotation, this is arguably still one of the best, even if you don't give the thing trample and haste. We have a couple that give +3 power in Turn Inside Out and Wild Ride. Wild Ride, sorcery speed, which is a bit of a downside. More importantly, neither one of them actually boosts toughness. Meanwhile, Dreadmaw's Ire is +2/+2, Felonious Rage +2/+0, but you get a token when it dies. So I think that full bore, which is 1 toughness away from being a rampant growth, as it is, even without the trample and haste, might still just be good enough in some sort of Leyline of Resonance pump style deck. So full bore, I don't think it's broken or anything, but it seems like another very playable pump spell, which is worth keeping in mind if you need a pump spell in standard. Finally today, we get some draft chaff that you can check out over at MTGPreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Edge of Eternity spoilers for today. So what's your favorite card of the day? What do you think about the set? Let me know in the comments, and I'll be back tomorrow with even more Edge of Eternity spoilers. So until then, have a spectacular day, everyone, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, check out our VV Hollow 1 video that we played in Modern a couple days ago, and you can also find yesterday's spoiler video right here.